A homeless soldier is dragged into court, shackled, silent, forgotten by the world. To everyone in the room, he's just another broken man, until the judge hears his name and stands up in shock. In that moment, everything changes. Whispers ripple through the courtroom, eyes shift. Something's not right and nobody knows why. The soldier says nothing. Now he's on trial for something far bigger than anyone realizes. But who is this man they've written off? Why did the judge react like that? And what hidden story is about to blow the courtroom wide open? Before we begin, send a quick wave in the comments. Tell me your city, your country, your vibe. It's amazing how stories like this echo across the world. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead in the downtown courthouse as Sergeant First Class Reginald Hawthorne sat quietly, the cold metal of his handcuffs pressing against his wrists. His torn military fatigues, though weathered and worn, still carried the dignified bearing of his service years. Just 24 hours ago, he had been doing what came naturally to him, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The scene played over in his mind. He had been sitting on the concrete steps of St. Mary's Shelter, watching the evening traffic drift by, when he heard the first scream. 3 young men, their gang colors bright against the growing dusk, had cornered Lucia Martinez against the chain-link fence. Her hands were protectively crossed over her swollen belly, 8 months pregnant and terrified. "Please," she had begged, "take my purse. Just don't hurt my baby." Reggie hadn't hesitated. Years of combat training kicked in as he moved silently across the parking lot. "Step away from the lady," he had called out, his voice carrying the unmistakable authority of command. The gang members had turned, sneering at what they saw. Just another homeless vet in ragged clothes. The biggest one, sporting a fresh neck tattoo, had pulled out a knife. "Mind your own business, old man." What happened next took less than 30 seconds. Reggie moved with precision that belied his weathered appearance. 2 quick strikes had disarmed the knife wielder, while a sweep took down the second attacker. The third ran, leaving his companions groaning on the asphalt. Lucia had escaped unharmed, but when the police arrived, they found a different scene. 2 young men on the ground, and a disheveled veteran standing over them. Now, in the harsh courthouse lighting, Reggie's public defender shuffled through his papers without making eye contact. The young lawyer, fresh out of law school, with an ill-fitting suit and nervous energy, had spent all of 5 minutes reviewing the case before the hearing. "Mr. Hawthorne," the defender whispered, his tone carrying that special kind of condescension reserved for those society had written off, "please let me do the talking. With your condition, it's better if you stay quiet." Reggie sat straighter in his chair, his shoulders square despite the shackles. He had faced worse than this, much worse, but the assumption of his instability stung more than he cared to admit. Around him, the courtroom bustled with morning activities. The prosecutor, a sharp-dressed woman with steel-rimmed glasses, organized her files with military precision. The bailiff stood at attention, occasionally casting wary glances in Reggie's direction. Through the gallery doors, Reggie caught a glimpse of Lucia, her dark eyes filled with worry as she waddled in, supported by a shelter volunteer. She had come to speak on his behalf, despite her condition and against her family's wishes. The sight warmed something inside him that had been cold for a very long time. Judge Margaret Chen entered the courtroom, her robes flowing as she took her seat. Her eyes, sharp and assessing, moved from the case file to Reggie's face. Case number 2738, People versus Reginald Hawthorne. Charges of assault and battery. How does the defendant plead? The public defender stood, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Your Honor, my client pleads not guilty." Reggie's voice cut through the courtroom, clear and steady. His defender turned, face flushing with annoyance, but Reggie continued, "Your Honor, I respectfully request permission to address the court." Judge Chen leaned forward, studying him with renewed interest. Something in his bearing, the quiet dignity that decades of service had ingrained, caught her attention. "Granted, Mr. Hawthorne." I intervened to protect a pregnant woman from assault. I used only the force necessary to neutralize the threat to her safety. My actions were in defense of another, nothing more. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor, the defendant has a history of unstable behavior. He's been living on the streets for 3 years with multiple complaints of aggressive... Objection, Your Honor. The public defender finally found his voice, though it cracked slightly. The prosecution is making unsubstantiated claims about my client's character. Judge Chen raised her hand for silence, her gaze never leaving Reggie's face. There was something about his posture, the way he held himself despite the shackles and torn clothes, that spoke of discipline and training. His eyes were clear, focused, showing none of the instability the prosecution claimed. Mrs. Martinez, the judge called out, you were the alleged victim in this incident. Do you wish to make a statement? Lucia struggled to her feet, one hand on her belly. Yes, Your Honor. This man saved my life, and my baby's life. He didn't hurt those boys any more than he had to. He's been watching over everyone at the shelter for months now, never causing trouble, always helping others. He's a hero, not a criminal. The courtroom fell silent, and in that moment, through the torn fatigues and the shackles, others began to see what Lucia saw. Not society's cast-off, but a man of honor who had never stopped serving, even when the world had turned its back on him. Judge Chen had barely begun her deliberations when a court clerk rushed in, whispering urgently in her ear. She nodded, gathering her papers. We'll take a brief recess. Judge Harrison Whitmore will be taking over this case due to an urgent matter requiring my attention elsewhere. She stood, her robes swishing as she exited the courtroom. The bailiff called out, "All rise," as Judge Harrison Whitmore entered moments later. His silver hair caught the fluorescent light as he took his seat, his bearing speaking of both military discipline and judicial authority. He adjusted his reading glasses, reaching for the case file with practiced efficiency. Please state the defendant's full name and service number for the record. Judge Whitmore instructed the bailiff, his tone carrying the weight of 20 years on the bench. The bailiff cleared his throat. Sergeant First Class Reginald James Hawthorne, service number 37249870. Judge Whitmore's hand froze mid-motion. The color drained from his face as the numbers echoed in his mind, transporting him back 23 years to the dust and danger of Afghanistan. 23 years earlier, Private Harrison Whitmore pressed himself against the cold rock, his heart hammering against his ribs. The bitter taste of fear filled his mouth as bullets chipped away at the boulder, providing his only cover. The rest of his unit lay scattered across the ravine, pinned down by relentless enemy fire from the ridgeline above. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as sweat and dust stung his eyes. Their routine patrol had walked straight into an ambush. 3 of his fellow soldiers were already wounded, their calls for help barely audible over the deafening gunfire. "We're not going to make it," someone shouted from behind a nearby outcropping. Private Whitmore closed his eyes, thinking of the letter from his pregnant wife in his breast pocket. He had promised her he would come home. That's when he heard it, a different rhythm of gunfire, precise and measured, coming from their left flank. Through the haze of gun smoke, Whitmore caught glimpses of a lone figure moving with incredible speed and skill across the rocky terrain. The mystery soldier was systematically taking out the enemy positions, drawing their fire away from the pinned-down unit. In less than 5 minutes, the ridge fell silent. Whitmore watched in awe as their savior efficiently cleared the enemy positions, ensuring there were no remaining threats. The unknown soldier moved with the precision of a seasoned warrior, checking on the wounded and calling in coordinates for evacuation. Whitmore tried to get a clear look at their rescuer's face, but the soldier kept his distance, communicating only through hand signals. By the time the medical evacuation helicopters arrived, kicking up clouds of dust and debris, the mysterious hero had disappeared. Later, when Whitmore asked about their savior, all he could find was a casualty report listing a Sergeant Hawthorne who had been reportedly killed in action the next day. He had never gotten the chance to thank the man who had saved not just his life, but the lives of his entire unit. Present day. Judge Withmore's hands trembled slightly as he looked up from the case file, studying the defendant before him with new eyes. Despite the years and hardship evident on his face, there was no mistaking the bearing of the man who had saved his life that day in Afghanistan. The same quiet strength, the same watchful eyes that had swept the ridgeline for threats now met his gaze across the courtroom. The weight of his judicial robes suddenly felt heavy on his shoulders. Here sat the man who had given him the chance to come home to his wife, to meet his daughter, to build the life he now had. And yet, the law demanded his objectivity, his emotional distance from the cases before him. Withmore's throat tightened as he remembered the letter in his breast pocket that day, the one telling him he was going to be a father. Because of the man sitting before him now, he had been there to hold his daughter when she was born. He had watched her grow up, graduate college, begin her own family, all of it possible because a stranger had risked everything to save his unit that day. The courtroom waited in respectful silence as Judge Withmore visibly collected himself. His judicial training warred with the deep personal debt he carried. The law was clear about the charges before him, but how could he ignore the debt of honor he owed? How could he maintain his judicial integrity while facing the man who had given him the gift of the last 23 years of his life? Reggie sat quietly in his shackles, giving no indication that he recognized the judge or remembered that day in Afghanistan. His face remained composed, showing the same quiet dignity he had displayed in battle so many years ago. Judge Withmore gripped his gavel, his knuckles white with tension. The weight of the past and present pressed down on him as he prepared to address the court, knowing that whatever decision he made would test the bounds of both his judicial oath and his personal honor. The Assistant District Attorney, Sarah Chen, rose from her seat, her heels clicking against the polished floor as she approached the witness stand. Officer Mike Patterson, the arresting officer, sat rigidly in his uniform. "Officer Patterson, please describe the events of March 15th, Chen requested. "I responded to a disturbance call outside the St. Mary's shelter. Upon arrival, I found 3 men on the ground, injured, and the defendant standing over them." Patterson glanced at Reggie, who sat quietly, his weathered hands folded in his lap. A pregnant woman was crying nearby. "And the defendant assaulted these men?" "Objection leading," Reggie's public defender called out half-heartedly. "Sustained," Judge Withmore said, his eyes never leaving Reggie's face. Chen rephrased, "What did you observe about the defendant's actions?" He had clearly disabled the men using military combat techniques, but what struck me was his composure. He was protecting the pregnant woman, Lucia Martinez. She kept saying he'd saved her life. The prosecution called their next witness, Dr. Sarah Reynolds, a VA psychiatrist. "Dr. Reynolds, you evaluated Sergeant Hawthorne 3 years ago?" Chen asked. "Yes, he was struggling with severe PTSD following his final deployment. The trauma was compounded by personal losses at home." "Could you elaborate?" Dr. Reynolds adjusted her glasses. "Sergeant Hawthorne returned from a classified operation to find his world shattered. His wife, believing him dead after a mission went dark, had remarried. His young daughter had been told he died a hero. The witness protection program that was supposed to shield him from criminal retaliation had failed. He lost everything: his family, his identity, his sense of purpose." Judge Withmore's grip tightened on his gavel as the story unfolded. In the gallery, several observers wiped away tears. And how did this affect him? He struggled to maintain employment due to hypervigilance and trust issues. Eventually, he lost his home. But what's remarkable is that even while homeless, he never lost his core values. Other veterans at the VA spoke of him protecting weaker individuals on the streets, sharing his food, and maintaining a strict moral code despite his circumstances. The prosecution called their final witness, Lucia Martinez, now 7 months pregnant. She walked to the stand, her hand resting protectively over her swollen belly. "Ms. Martinez, please tell us what happened that night," Chen prompted. "I was leaving the shelter after my shift as a volunteer," Lucia's voice trembled. 3 men cornered me in the parking lot. They wanted my purse, but I could tell they had worse intentions. I was terrified for my baby. She paused, touching her stomach again. That's when Mr. Hawthorne appeared. He told them to leave me alone. They attacked him instead. And how did the defendant respond? He moved so fast, so efficiently. He didn't hurt them more than necessary, just stopped them from hurting me. Then he helped me inside and called 911 himself. Lucia turned to face the judge directly. He saved us both, Your Honor, my baby and me. Throughout the testimony, Reggie remained still, his posture military straight despite his shabby clothes. His eyes, clear and alert, followed each speaker with quiet intensity. The prosecution rested their case, but the courtroom's atmosphere had shifted. What had begun as a simple assault case had transformed into something more complex. The gallery whispered among themselves, seeing beyond the torn fatigues and unkempt appearance to glimpse the hero underneath. Judge Whitmore watched as more pieces of the puzzle fell into place. The man who had saved his unit in Afghanistan hadn't disappeared. He'd been hidden, then forgotten by the very country he'd served. The judge remembered the medal ceremony he'd attended years ago, where a mysterious soldier had been awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for saving 47 lives in a classified operation. The soldier's name had been withheld for security reasons, but now, a court officer approached with a sealed file marked classified. Inside lay the full account of Sergeant Hawthorne's service record, including the details of his final mission, the one that had cost him everything. The same mission that had forced him into witness protection, separating him from his family, and ultimately leading to his current circumstances. The bailiff watched in surprise as Judge Whitmore removed his reading glasses and wiped his eyes. The stern judge, who had presided over thousands of cases with unwavering authority, now struggled to maintain his composure as he read through the file detailing Reggie's sacrifice and subsequent tragedy. In the defendant's chair, Reggie Hawthorne sat with the same quiet dignity he had shown on the streets, in combat, and throughout his personal struggles. His eyes held no bitterness, only a weathered acceptance and an unwavering commitment to doing what was right, regardless of the cost to himself. Reggie's public defender, Mark Torres, straightened his tie and stood. Despite his initial skepticism, the past few hours had transformed his understanding of his client. He called his first witness, Father Michael O'Connor from St. Mary's Church. "Father O'Connor, how long have you known the defendant?" Torres asked. The elderly priest adjusted his collar. 3 years since he first came to our neighborhood, though known might be too strong a word. Reginald prefers to remain in the shadows. Could you describe his activities in your community? He's like a guardian angel, Father O'Connor said, his voice warm with admiration. At first, we just noticed fewer incidents around the shelter. Then, the stories started coming in. Torres nodded encouragingly. What kind of stories? 2 months ago, some drug dealers were trying to recruit teenagers outside our youth center. Reginald appeared from nowhere and convinced them to leave. He didn't use violence, just talked to them with such authority that they actually listened. The priest smiled. The dealers never came back. Next came Maria Gonzalez, a social worker from the neighborhood. I work late shifts at the Women's Crisis Center, she explained. 3 times this year alone, Sergeant Hawthorne has prevented assaults on women walking home. He escorts them to safety, then disappears before they can thank him. The testimony continued as Torres called witness after witness. A teenage boy described how Reggie had stopped a gang initiation. An elderly woman tearfully recounted how he had protected her from muggers. A shelter volunteer told the court about Reggie sharing his meager food with hungry children. Assistant District Attorney Chen rose for cross-examination. While these stories are touching, they don't change the fact that the defendant took the law into his own hands. He assaulted 3 men. Objection, Torres interrupted. Argumentative. Sustained, Judge Whitmore ruled. Chen adjusted her approach. Ms. Gonzalez, did the defendant ever report these incidents to the police? He couldn't, Maria replied. He was supposed to stay hidden because of the witness protection program, but he couldn't just watch people get hurt either. Torres called his next witness, Detective James Rodriguez from the city's gang unit. The detective's testimony caused a stir in the courtroom. "We've noticed a pattern over the past 3 years," Rodriguez explained. "A significant drop in violent crimes in a 10-block radius around St. Mary's. We had no idea it was connected to Sergeant Hawthorne." The victims would describe their rescuer as a homeless veteran, but he'd always be gone before officers arrived. Chen stood again. "Detective, regardless of intent, vigilante justice is still illegal." "True," Rodriguez conceded, "but I've reviewed the incident reports. In every case, Sergeant Hawthorne used minimum force necessary. He prevented violence rather than causing it, and he always called 911 afterward." The parade of witnesses continued. A shop owner described how Reggie had talked down an armed robber. A nurse told the court about him bringing injured homeless people to the emergency room. A teacher explained how he walked groups of children home when gang activity was high. Through it all, Reggie sat quietly, his expression humble. He seemed almost embarrassed by the praise, as if he'd simply done what anyone would do. Chen maintained her position during closing arguments. While the defendant's past actions are admirable, they don't excuse taking the law into his own hands. The charges of assault remain valid under the law. Torres rose for his final statement. "My client has demonstrated a consistent pattern of protecting the vulnerable while using minimal force. The incident with Ms. Martinez follows this same pattern. He acted to prevent a violent crime, protected an innocent person, and immediately reported it to authorities." As Torres spoke, more people slipped into the courtroom. They were a diverse group, the forgotten faces of the street, the working poor, elderly pensioners, and young families. They filled the gallery, standing respectfully when there were no more seats. Each had a story about the quiet veteran who had helped them when no one else would. Judge Whitmore observed the gathering crowd, his expression thoughtful. The man who had saved his unit in Afghanistan hadn't stopped serving others, even when the system had failed him. Instead, he had appointed himself guardian of those society often overlooked. The prosecution's argument was legally sound, but the weight of testimony painted a clear picture. For 3 years, Reginald Hawthorne had been a silent protector, using his military training not for violence, but to prevent it. He had chosen to help others, even when doing so risked exposing him to the very dangers the witness protection program was meant to prevent. The gallery waited in tense silence as Judge Whitmore prepared to announce his decision. The homeless veteran in torn fatigues had transformed before their eyes into something more. A hero who had never stopped serving, even when his country had forgotten him. The courtroom fell silent as Lucia Martinez struggled to her feet, her pregnant form making the movement difficult. "Your Honor, I need to speak," she said, her voice trembling but determined. Judge Whitmore leaned forward. "Ms. Martinez, you've already given your testimony." "No, sir, not the whole truth." Lucia's hands shook as she gripped the gallery railing. "My real name is Lucia Valdez. My father was Federal Prosecutor Antonio Valdez." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Judge Whitmore's eyes widened in recognition. Antonio Valdez had vanished 6 months ago while building a case against organized crime. "Those men weren't random attackers," Lucia continued. "They work for Vincent Torino. They've been following me since my father disappeared." Tears rolled down her cheeks. "I've been hiding at the shelter trying to protect my baby." Assistant District Attorney Chen stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular." "Let her speak," Judge Whitmore ordered, his expression grave. Reggie sat straighter in his chair, his weathered face showing concern for Lucia rather than himself. His eyes scanned the courtroom, noting the sudden tension in certain uniformed officers. "Mr. Hawthorne didn't just stop an assault," Lucia explained. "He interrupted a kidnapping. Torino's men have been trafficking women through the port. My father found evidence." Her voice broke. "That's why he disappeared." Detective Rodriguez moved closer to Lucia, his hand instinctively moving to his weapon. Ms. Valdez, why didn't you come forward earlier? Because I didn't know who to trust. Lucia's eyes darted to several police officers in the room. They're everywhere. Torino's people, in the department, in the courts. As if confirming her words, 2 officers near the back of the courtroom slipped out quietly. Rodriguez noticed and spoke quietly into his radio. Reggie's public defender, Torres, approached the bench. Your Honor, this changes everything. The assault charges were clearly manufactured. To get him off the streets, Lucia interrupted. Sergeant Hawthorne has been watching the port for months. He's seen their operation. That's why they want him silenced. The judge turned to Reggie. Is this true, Sergeant? Reggie nodded slowly. 3 warehouses on the East Dock. Women brought in on fishing boats at night. I've been documenting everything, but couldn't risk coming forward. His voice was steady, matter of fact. They killed 2 other witnesses already, made them look like homeless deaths, overdose, exposure. Detective Rodriguez pulled out his phone, showing photographs to the judge. These match locations we've been investigating, but we could never get enough evidence for a warrant. Because they always knew you were coming, Reggie said quietly. The Night Patrol Sergeant, Johnson, he reports directly to Torino. The courtroom erupted in murmurs. Judge Whitmore banged his gavel for order. Suddenly, the main doors burst open. A well-dressed man in his 50s strode in, flanked by 2 expensive-looking lawyers. Vincent Torino's cold eyes swept the room, lingering on Lucia before fixing on Reggie. Your Honor, one of Torino's lawyers spoke smoothly. My client has information relevant to these proceedings. Your client isn't welcome in my courtroom? Judge Whitmore's voice was steel. Torino smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. I'm merely a concerned citizen, Your Honor. These accusations are disturbing. Perhaps we should discuss this somewhere more private? Nothing about this will be private anymore, the judge declared. He turned to his bailiff. Call the FBI, now. Torino's smile vanished. You're making a mistake. His gaze shifted to Reggie. Some people should stay lost, Sergeant. For their own good. The threat hung in the air. Reggie met Torino's stare unflinchingly. The same quiet strength he'd shown in Afghanistan 2 decades ago, evident in his bearing. Detective Rodriguez moved to block Torino's view of Lucia. Sir, I suggest you leave. Now? Of course. Torino adjusted his silk tie. But this isn't over. He turned and walked out, his lawyers hurrying after him. The courtroom remained tense after his departure. Judge Whitmore conferred quietly with court security, while Rodriguez organized protection for Lucia. The assault charges are dismissed, Whitmore announced. Sergeant Hawthorne will be released to protective custody, pending federal investigation of these allegations. As court officers removed Reggie's shackles, Lucia approached him. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner. I was so scared. You did the right thing, Reggie assured her gently. Your father would be proud. We'll need your documentation of the trafficking operation, Rodriguez said to Reggie, and everything you know about their network. Reggie nodded. It's all hidden, dead drops around the city. I can take you to them, but we'll need to be careful. Torino's people will be watching. The gravity of the situation settled over the courtroom. What had begun as a simple assault case had exposed a vast criminal conspiracy. Reggie's years of silent observation from the streets had built a case that could bring down Torino's entire operation, if they could stay alive long enough to prove it. Judge Harrison Whitmore sat in his chambers, his fingers drumming against the polished oak desk. The weight of the past 23 years pressed down on his shoulders as he stared at the phone before him. His clerk had just left after bringing him Reggie's complete case file, and now the moment of decision was upon him. Through the window, he could see the courthouse plaza where, just hours ago, Vincent Torino had made his thinly veiled threats. The judge's hand moved to his chest, touching the spot where a bullet had nearly ended his life in Afghanistan. the day Reggie Hawthorne had saved him. "I can't be objective," he muttered to himself. "Not with this case, not with him." Whitmore picked up his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. After 3 rings, a familiar voice answered. "Judge Matthews? Harrison Whitmore here. I need a favor, and it needs to happen quickly." He paused, listening. "Yes, I'm requesting a sealed military record to be opened. Medal of Honor recipient, classified mission. The paperwork will be on your desk in 5 minutes." After hanging up, Whitmore wrote quickly on his official letterhead, his signature flowing across the bottom with practiced ease. He buzzed for his clerk. "Get this to Judge Matthews immediately," he instructed, "and tell the bailiff I'm ready to return to court." The courtroom fell silent as Judge Whitmore entered. The afternoon sun slanted through the high windows, casting long shadows across the floor. Reggie sat at the defense table, his posture military straight despite his ragged appearance. Detective Rodriguez had positioned officers at every entrance, their faces tense with alertness. "Before we proceed," Whitmore began, his voice carrying the weight of 2 decades of judicial authority, "I must address a matter of significant importance." He removed his reading glasses, looking directly at Reggie. "Due to circumstances that have recently come to light, I find myself unable to continue presiding over this case." Assistant District Attorney Chen rose quickly. "Your Honor, with the new developments regarding the Torino organization, any delay could seriously compromise." "I am recusing myself," Whitmore continued firmly, "due to a personal connection to the defendant that predates this court." A murmur rippled through the gallery. Reggie's public defender, Torres, suddenly sat up straighter, his previous indifference evaporating. "However," Whitmore held up a hand, "before I step down, I have issued one final order." He lifted a document from his bench. "I have authorized the unsealing of Sergeant Hawthorne's complete military service record." "Objection." Chen was on his feet again. "Your Honor, those records were classified for national security reasons. The prosecution strongly objects to—" "Noted," Whitmore cut him off, "but as the records have already been unsealed by proper authority, your objection is moot." Torres stood now, his entire demeanor transformed. "Your Honor, the defense requests immediate access to those records." "They'll be provided to both sides," Whitmore assured him. "Judge Linda Matthews will be taking over this case, effective immediately." He paused, looking around the courtroom. "But before I go, let the record show that 23 years ago, in Afghanistan, I served as Private Harrison Whitmore, and on April 15, 2000, I was saved from certain death by a soldier who disappeared before I could thank him." The courtroom had grown so quiet that the tick of the wall clock seemed to echo. Reggie's face remained impassive, but his hands, folded on the table before him, tightened slightly. "That soldier," Whitmore continued, his voice thick with emotion, "earned the Congressional Medal of Honor for his actions that day. He saved not just my life, but the lives of 47 others in a classified operation that changed the course of the conflict." He looked directly at Reggie. "I never knew his name until today." The gallery erupted in whispers. Torres was frantically flipping through the newly delivered military records, his eyes widening with each page. "Your Honor," Chen protested, "this dramatic revelation clearly demonstrates why these records should have remained sealed. The prosecution moves to—" "The prosecution's motion is now Judge Matthews' concern," Whitmore interrupted. "I expect she'll be here within the hour." He gathered his papers, then paused for a final moment. "This court is in recess pending her arrival." As Whitmore stood to leave, the bailiff called out, "All rise." The judge's robe swished softly as he stepped down from the bench. As he passed the defense table, his eyes met Reggie's. 2 decades of unspoken gratitude passed between them in that brief moment. Torres was already on his phone, speaking rapidly to his office. "Get me everything you can find on classified operations in Afghanistan in 2000. Yes, everything. And find out who's still alive from Reggie's unit." Chen huddled with his team, their expressions grave as they pored over the newly unsealed records. The courtroom buzzed with speculation as court officers began clearing the room for the recess. Detective Rodriguez approached Reggie, speaking in low tones. "Medal of Honor? Why didn't you tell us?" Reggie's voice was quiet. "Some things are better left in the past, Detective." He looked toward the door, where Judge Withmore had exited. Or at least, they were. The courthouse press room erupted into chaos as reporters scrambled for their phones. The unsealed military records had sent shockwaves through the justice system, and now the story was breaking across every major news network. Inside the courtroom, Judge Linda Matthews studied the documents with intense focus, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose as she flipped through page after page of previously classified information. The silence in the room felt electric. "These records," she began, her voice steady but tinged with astonishment, "detail acts of valor that go far beyond ordinary military service." She looked up at Reggie, who sat uncomfortably in his chair, his shoulders tense. "Sergeant First Class Reginald Hawthorne, you were awarded the Congressional Medal of Honor for actions that saved 47 lives during Operation Silent Shield." Reggie's public defender, Torres, stood up, a new energy in his stance. "Your Honor, if I may?" At her nod, he continued, "These records also reveal something far more disturbing. My client's reported death was fabricated by military intelligence after he exposed illegal activities by Black Star Security, a private military contractor." The gallery broke into hushed whispers. Detective Rodriguez, seated in the front row, leaned forward, his notebook forgotten in his hands. "The record shows," Torres continued, reading from the documents, "that Sergeant Hawthorne discovered Black Star operatives engaging in weapons trafficking and civilian exploitation. His testimony led to multiple federal indictments, but before the cases could go to trial, there was an attempt on his life." Assistant District Attorney Chen rose slowly. "Your Honor, if these documents are authentic, they completely change the nature of our current case. The prosecution requests time to verify these records and investigate their implications." Judge Matthews nodded. "Granted. But first, let's hear from Sergeant Hawthorne himself." She turned to Reggie. "Would you care to address these revelations?" Reggie stood slowly, his chains rattling in the quiet courtroom. Despite his worn clothing and unkempt appearance, he suddenly carried himself with unmistakable military bearing. "Your Honor," he began, his voice low but clear, "I never wanted any of this to come to light." He paused, looking around the courtroom. "The mission in Afghanistan, we did what was necessary. 47 people got to go home to their families. That was enough for me." "And Judge Withmore was one of those 47? Matthews asked. "Yes, ma'am, he was a private then. Young. Had his whole life ahead of him." Reggie's eyes flickered to the empty judge's chair where Withmore had sat. They all did. A reporter slipped into the courtroom, then another. The story was spreading like wildfire. Judge Matthews frowned at the disruption, but continued. "The records indicate you were placed in witness protection after exposing Black Star's activities. What happened?" Reggie's jaw tightened. "The program was compromised. Someone leaked my location. After the second attempt on my life, I realized the only way to stay alive was to disappear completely." His voice grew quieter. "My wife had already been told I was dead. My daughter, too. It seemed better to let them believe it." The gallery fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Even Chen, who had been aggressively prosecuting the case, looked troubled. Torres approached the bench with another document. "Your Honor, these records also show that several Black Star executives had connections to the Torino crime organization, the same organization that orchestrated the attack on Lucia Martinez." Judge Matthews studied the new information. "Mr. Chen, given these developments, what is the prosecution's position?" Chen stood, straightening his tie. The state requests 24 hours to confer with the district attorney's office. These revelations suggest a much larger criminal conspiracy than we initially understood. Granted, Matthews replied. She turned to Reggie. Sergeant Hawthorne, I want to address something directly. You received our nation's highest military honor, yet you've been living on the streets, protecting others while hiding your own identity. Why? Reggie shifted uncomfortably under the attention. Sometimes, Your Honor, the only way to help people is to be invisible. On the streets, I could watch over those who needed protection without drawing attention to myself. He gestured to his torn fatigues. Nobody looks too closely at a homeless veteran. The irony of his words wasn't lost on anyone in the courtroom. Now everyone was looking very closely indeed. Judge Matthews removed her glasses. In light of these extraordinary circumstances, this court will recess until 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. Mr. Chen, I expect the prosecution's updated position then. She paused, looking at the growing number of reporters at the back of the courtroom. And given the sensitive nature of this information, I'm ordering all parties to refrain from speaking to the media until further notice. As the bailiff called out, "All rise," the courtroom buzzed with suppressed excitement. Reporters rushed out to file their stories, while law enforcement officers huddled in small groups, discussing the implications of the revelations. Reggie sat back down, his shoulders slumping slightly. The weight of his exposed past seemed to press down on him more heavily than his shackles. Detective Rodriguez approached the defense table, his expression a mix of awe and regret. "A Medal of Honor recipient," he said quietly. "All this time, living on our streets, we should have known. We should have seen." Reggie looked up at him with tired eyes. "That's the thing about heroes, Detective. Sometimes they don't want to be found." Special Agent Diana Reeves strode into the courtroom, her FBI credentials catching the morning light. The proceedings hadn't officially begun, but the room was already packed with spectators and media. She made her way directly to the prosecution table where Chen was reviewing his notes. "We need to stop this trial immediately," she announced, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Sergeant Hawthorne's life is in danger." Judge Matthews, who had just entered through her chamber doors, paused. "Agent Reeves, approach the bench. Both counsels, join us." As they huddled at the judge's bench, Reeves pulled out a thick file. "What you're about to see is classified information about Black Star Security's current operations. They didn't just disappear after Afghanistan. They rebranded. They're now operating as Aegis Global Solutions, with contracts throughout the United States." Chen leafed through the documents, his expression growing darker. "Private security for corporations, event management, personal protection. They look legitimate." "That's their cover," Reeves explained. "But they're running the same playbook here they used overseas. Protection rackets, human trafficking, weapons dealing, and they've been systematically eliminating everyone who could expose them." From his seat, Reggie watched the whispered conversation, his posture alert. He'd recognized Reeves the moment she walked in. She'd been part of the original witness protection team. The judge called the court to order, her face grave. "In light of new evidence, this court is now in closed session. All members of the public and press are ordered to leave immediately." Once the gallery had cleared, Agent Reeves addressed the court. 3 years ago, our witness protection program for Afghanistan war crime witnesses was compromised. Within 6 months, we lost 4 protected witnesses. 2 in apparent accidents, 1 to suicide, and 1 in a home invasion. She projected photos onto the courtroom screen. These were the others in Sergeant Hawthorne's witness group. After the 4th death, we realized someone had accessed our database. But before we could move our remaining witnesses, Sergeant Hawthorne disappeared. Reggie spoke up from his seat. "I spotted the surveillance team outside my safe house, standard 2-man rotation, but they were using the same tactics I'd seen Black Star use in Afghanistan. I knew what was coming." "So you chose to become homeless," Torres said, understanding dawning on his face. Best way to disappear is to become someone people look past, Reggie explained. I kept moving. Never stayed in one shelter too long. Learned which cameras to avoid, which alleys provided escape routes. The streets became my early warning system. Other homeless folks would let me know if anyone was asking questions. Agent Reeves nodded. It was brilliant, actually. We couldn't find him, which means they couldn't either, until now. She pulled up another image, security camera footage from the night of Reggie's arrest. The 3 men who attacked Miss Martinez weren't just gang members, they're Aegis Global contractors. This was a targeted operation to flush out Sergeant Hawthorne. The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Chen was the first to speak. How deep does this go? Aegis Global has security contracts with 12 major cities, including this one, Reeves replied. They've infiltrated law enforcement, private security firms, and even some government agencies. The network Sergeant Hawthorne exposed in Afghanistan didn't end, it evolved. Judge Matthews leaned forward. Agent Reeves, are you suggesting that Aegis Global orchestrated this entire situation? The attack, the arrest, this trial? Yes, Your Honor. Vincent Torino isn't just a crime boss. He's Aegis Global's primary domestic operator. They use his organization as a cutout for their illegal activities. When Sergeant Hawthorne started interfering with their operations on the streets, they realized who he was. Reggie's chains clinked as he shifted in his chair. I recognized their patterns, the way they were moving girls through the shelters, the weapons coming into the city. Same operation, different continent. And you kept interfering, Reeves said, a note of admiration in her voice. Even knowing who they were, you couldn't walk away. Those girls in the shelters, the kids being recruited as lookouts, they didn't have anyone else looking out for them, Reggie replied simply. Detective Rodriguez, still present from the previous day, stepped forward. We've had 3 officers in our organized crime unit suddenly transfer or retire in the past month. Were they? Aegis Global Assets, Reeves confirmed. They've been cleaning house, preparing for something big. This trial was supposed to discredit Sergeant Hawthorne before he could expose their current operations. Instead, it's done the opposite. The judge studied the evidence before her, then looked at Reggie. You chose to remain homeless, not just because of personal tragedy, but as a survival strategy against a powerful and corrupt organization, all while continuing to protect others from their operations. Sometimes the best defense is to have no defense, Your Honor, Reggie replied. No home means no address. No job means no paperwork. No connections means no leverage. The streets were my camouflage. Agent Reeves placed one final document on the judge's bench. We've confirmed that Aegis Global has active surveillance teams in the city right now. They're watching this courthouse. The minute Sergeant Hawthorne leaves custody, he's a target again. The gravity of the situation settled over the courtroom like a heavy blanket. What had started as a simple assault case had unveiled a vast conspiracy of corruption and crime, with Reggie caught at its center. His years of homeless invisibility hadn't been random tragedy. They had been calculated survival against a powerful enemy that had never stopped hunting him. The courthouse erupted in chaos as gunfire shattered the morning calm. Glass rained down from the windows as armed men in tactical gear burst through multiple entrances. Reggie's head snapped up, his military training instantly kicking in. "Everyone down!" he shouted, his commanding voice cutting through the panic. "Get away from the windows!" Agent Reeves drew her weapon while Detective Rodriguez helped the judge take cover behind her bench. The bailiff moved to secure the main entrance, but took a hit and went down. Without hesitation, Reggie acted. "Keys!" he called to the fallen bailiff. "Throw me your keys!" The wounded man slid his keyring across the floor. In one fluid motion, Reggie snatched them up and freed himself from his restraints. He immediately moved to Lucia, who was crouched behind a courtroom bench, hands protectively over her pregnant belly. "Stay close to me," he instructed, his voice steady and reassuring. "We need to get you to the secure holding area in the basement." Gunfire continued to pepper the courtroom as Torino's men advanced. Reggie could hear SWAT teams responding outside, but knew they'd need time to mount an effective counter-assault. Time they didn't have. "Agent Reeves," he called out, "can you cover the east entrance?" She nodded, taking up position. "Already on it." Reggie's mind raced through the courthouse layout he'd memorized during his previous appearances. "Detective, there's a security office on this floor. We need those cameras and building controls." "On my way," Rodriguez replied, moving low along the wall. A flashbang grenade bounced into the room. Without missing a beat, Reggie kicked it back through the doorway. The explosion outside was followed by shouts of pain and confusion. "That's how you do it!" someone in the room cheered. Reggie wasn't listening. He was already moving, guiding Lucia toward a side door while scanning for threats. 3 of Torino's men burst through another entrance, but Reeves was ready. Her precise shots dropped 2, while the third dove for cover. "Rodriguez, status on those cameras," Reggie called into the radio the detective had tossed him. "In the security office now, I count 12 hostiles inside the building, more outside. SWAT's setting up a perimeter." Reggie led Lucia down a service corridor, his movements swift but controlled. "Lock down all elevator access except the service lift. Direct SWAT to the loading dock entrance. Least defended approach." The sound of boots on marble echoed from around the corner. Reggie pressed Lucia against the wall, shielding her with his body as 2 armed men passed their position. Once clear, they continued toward the secure holding area. "Stay in this room," he told her, opening a heavy metal door. "Rodriguez will monitor you on the cameras. Do not open this door for anyone but me or Agent Reeves." "Thank you," Lucia whispered, squeezing his hand before he closed the door. Reggie moved back toward the main conflict, his mind shifting into the same tactical space that had served him in Afghanistan. He retrieved the fallen bailiff's sidearm, checking the magazine. "Reeves, they'll try to flood the main corridor soon," he radioed. "We need to split their attention." "What's the play?" "Fire alarm and sprinklers in the east wing. When they respond, SWAT comes through the loading dock. Classic hammer and anvil." The plan worked perfectly. When the sprinklers activated, half of Torino's men moved to investigate, thinking their targets were escaping that way. The moment they split their forces, SWAT breached through the loading dock. Reggie coordinated the response from his position, directing teams through Rodriguez's camera feed. His battlefield experience transformed the chaotic situation into a controlled operation. Every command was clear, every movement precise. "2 tangos, north stairwell," he called out. "Watch your corners on the 2nd floor. They're using the jury rooms for cover." SWAT teams moved with practiced efficiency, securing sections of the building under Reggie's guidance. His intimate knowledge of both military tactics and the courthouse layout proved invaluable. The final confrontation came when Torino himself emerged from a judge's chambers, using a clerk as a human shield. Reggie had anticipated this move. "Rodriguez, kill the lights in that section on my mark," he instructed, moving into position. The moment the lights went out, Reggie struck. His years of combat training took over as he disarmed Torino and freed the hostage in one smooth sequence. By the time the emergency lights came back on, the crime boss was face down and in custody. "Clear," came the calls from SWAT teams throughout the building. "Building secure." As the situation stabilized, Reggie did one final sweep before retrieving Lucia from the secure room. She emerged unharmed, tears of relief in her eyes. The courthouse staff and civilians gathered in the main hall, many still shaken but safe. They watched as Reggie coordinated with SWAT on securing the scene, his commanding presence a stark contrast to the shackled defendant he'd been just hours before. "I guess we know why he got that Medal of Honor," Agent Reeves remarked to Detective Rodriguez, watching Reggie ensure everyone received proper medical attention. The morning's events had transformed Reggie from a homeless veteran facing charges into the tactical expert and hero he'd never stopped being. His true nature had emerged when needed most, saving countless lives in the process. The courthouse buzzed with activity as federal agents processed the scene. Reggie sat on a bench in the hallway, his shoulders heavy with exhaustion after the siege. Emergency workers tended to the wounded while investigators documented evidence of the attack. The morning's chaos had transformed into ordered procedure, but a new tension filled the air as word spread of an unexpected witness arrival. Detective Rodriguez approached Reggie, his expression careful. "There's someone here to see you? Someone who says she has testimony about the contractor." Reggie looked up, his face questioning. "It's Patricia," Rodriguez said softly. "Your wife." The words hit Reggie like a physical blow. He stood slowly, his heart pounding. "Patricia? But she remarried." "Not by choice," Rodriguez explained. "She's been waiting to tell her story for years. When she heard you were alive..." He gestured toward a conference room down the hall. Reggie walked toward the room on unsteady legs. Through the glass panel, he caught a glimpse of her. Older, like him, but still beautiful. Still Patricia. She sat at the table with Agent Reeves, her hands clasped tightly together. When he opened the door, Patricia looked up. Their eyes met, and 23 years of separation collapsed into a single moment. She rose from her chair, tears already streaming down her face. "Reggie," she whispered. "Oh God, Reggie." They moved toward each other, as if drawn by gravity. When they embraced, Reggie felt the years of loneliness and pain begin to crack like ice in spring. "I never stopped loving you," Patricia said into his shoulder. "Never. You have to know that." "They told me you'd remarried," Reggie said, his voice rough with emotion. "Started a new life." Patricia pulled back, wiping tears from her cheeks. "They gave me no choice. The contractor, Maxwell Defense Solutions, they threatened our daughter. Said they'd kill her if I didn't maintain their cover story about your death." Her voice shook with years of suppressed anger. "They forced me to marry one of their operatives, to keep us under control, to make sure I never looked for you." Agent Reeves stepped forward, recorder in hand. "Mrs. Hawthorne, we need your official statement about Maxwell Defense Solutions' domestic operations." Patricia nodded, but kept hold of Reggie's hand as they sat down. "I'll tell you everything. 23 years of everything." She spoke for over an hour, detailing the contractor's systematic campaign of threats and manipulation, how they'd approached her just days after Reggie's supposed death, presenting a terrible choice, remarry their operative or lose her daughter, how they'd monitored her calls, her mail, her entire life. "They had people watching us constantly," Patricia explained, her grip tightening on Reggie's hand. "At Sarah's school, at my work, everywhere. The operative they made me marry, James Mitchell, he reported everything we did back to the company." "And Mitchell?" Agent Reeves asked. "Where is he now?" "Dead." Patricia's voice was flat. "Car accident 3 years ago. Too clean, too convenient. I think he was starting to feel guilty, starting to talk. Maxwell Defense Solutions doesn't tolerate loose ends." Reggie listened, his jaw clenched tight as the full scope of his family's suffering became clear. All those years on the streets, protecting strangers, while his own family had been trapped in a different kind of prison. "The same people who tried to kill me in Afghanistan," he said quietly. "They're behind Torino's operation too, using the same tactics, threats, coercion, violence." "Maxwell Defense Solutions has evolved," Patricia confirmed. "They're not just a military contractor anymore. They've built a network of criminal enterprises using the same infrastructure they developed overseas. Torino is just one of their many pawns." Agent Reeves leaned forward. "Your testimony connects all the pieces, Mrs. Hawthorne. The contractor's evolution into domestic organized crime, their method of controlling witnesses, their connection to Torino's attack today. This is exactly what we needed." But Reggie and Patricia barely heard her. They were lost in each other's eyes. Decades of forced separation, dissolving in the truth of their enduring love. "Sarah?" Reggie asked softly. "How is she?" Patricia smiled through fresh tears. Beautiful, strong, so much like you, she never believed you were really dead. Somehow she knew, deep down. She squeezed his hand. She's going to be so happy, Reggie. We both are. I never stopped thinking about you, Reggie said. Even when I believed I'd lost you, you were what kept me going. Agent Reeves quietly gathered her materials and stepped out, giving them privacy. Through the conference room window, other agents and officers worked to process the aftermath of the morning's violence. But inside the room, a different kind of aftermath unfolded. The healing of a family torn apart by corruption and greed. Patricia laid her head on Reggie's shoulder, their fingers still intertwined. We have so much time to make up for, she said. We have all the time in the world, Reggie replied, kissing the top of her head. And this time, nothing will tear us apart. Patricia and Reggie sat together in the renovated courtroom, now cleared of the morning's chaos. The judge had called a brief recess to allow the prosecution to bring in a surprise witness. The air hummed with anticipation. There's something else you should know, Patricia said softly, squeezing Reggie's hand. About Sarah. Before she could continue, the courtroom doors opened. A young woman in a crisp navy suit strode in, carrying a leather briefcase. Her dark hair was pulled back in a professional bun, but her determined stride was pure hawthorn. Reggie's breath caught in his throat. The prosecution calls Assistant District Attorney Sarah Hawthorne, the clerk announced. Reggie stood without thinking, his legs unsteady. The young woman, his daughter, stopped mid-step when their eyes met. For a moment, the busy courtroom faded away. Sarah's professional composure cracked as her hand flew to her mouth. Dad? Her voice carried across the silent room, small and uncertain, like the little girl he remembered. Sarah, Reggie whispered, his voice rough with emotion. She dropped her briefcase and ran forward, protocol forgotten. When she reached him, she threw her arms around his neck, just like she had as a child. Reggie held her tight, feeling her shoulders shake with quiet sobs. I knew you weren't dead, she said fiercely. I knew it. Everyone said I was crazy, that I needed to accept it. But I knew. The judge cleared his throat, clearly moved but trying to maintain order. Perhaps we should take a 15-minute recess to allow for circumstances. They moved to a private conference room, Patricia joining them. Sarah couldn't stop staring at her father, cataloging the changes in his face, the new gray in his hair. I've been tracking Maxwell Defense Solutions for 2 years, she explained, wiping tears from her cheeks. Their connection to organized crime, human trafficking, drug operations, I knew they were dirty, but I never imagined... She grabbed her father's hand. All this time, you were out there fighting the same battle. You became a prosecutor, Reggie said proudly, still amazed by the strong, capable woman his little girl had become. Sarah nodded. I wanted to protect people, make sure justice was served. She smiled through her tears. I guess it runs in the family. She's been building cases against Maxwell's criminal network piece by piece, Patricia added. She's got evidence linking them to 12 different criminal enterprises. The Torino case was supposed to be my big break, Sarah explained. I'd traced the connection between his operations and Maxwell's shell companies. But I could never prove the direct link to their board of directors. She squeezed her father's hand. Until now. Your father's testimony about their overseas operations, combined with my evidence of their domestic threats, and your financial investigation, Patricia's eyes shone with pride. Together, we can bring down their entire network. Reggie looked at his daughter with wonder. While I was protecting people on the streets, you were fighting the same battle in the courtroom. Different battlefields, same war, Sarah said. She straightened her shoulders, showing the same determination he'd carried into combat. And now, we fight it together. Agent Reeves knocked softly before entering. I hate to interrupt, but we need to prepare Adia Hawthorne's testimony. The defense is already trying to dismiss the new evidence. Sarah nodded, shifting seamlessly into prosecutor mode. I've got 3 years of financial records showing Maxwell's money flowing through Torino's operation. Wire transfers, shell companies, offshore accounts, all documented. She opened her briefcase, pulling out files. We can prove they've been using the same tactics they developed for silencing witnesses overseas in their domestic operations. Reggie watched with pride as his daughter laid out her evidence, explaining complex financial trails with practiced ease. She'd grown into a warrior for justice, fighting with law books instead of weapons, but just as dedicated to protecting the innocent. The contractor never expected their victims to fight back on 2 fronts, Agent Reeves observed. A decorated soldier exposing their street-level operations, while his prosecutor daughter dismantles their financial empire. It's almost poetic. Sarah paused in her legal explanation, looking at her father with tears in her eyes. All those nights I spent studying case law, preparing for the bar exam. I felt close to you somehow, like I was carrying on your mission of protecting people. She smiled. I just never dreamed we'd actually work together. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart, Reggie said softly. So proud of the woman you've become. Patricia wrapped her arms around them both. My warriors for justice, she said tenderly, finally together again. Agent Reeves discreetly checked her watch. We should head back in. The judge is waiting. Sarah gathered her files, then hesitated. She turned and hugged her father again, breathing in the reality of his presence. We've got 23 years to catch up on, she whispered. We will, Reggie promised, holding his daughter close. After we finish this fight. Sarah pulled back, squaring her shoulders. In that moment, she was every inch his daughter, a protector of the innocent, a seeker of justice, carrying on the family legacy in her own unique way. Together, they walked back toward the courtroom, ready to face whatever came next, as a family reunited in their shared mission of making the world a little safer, a little more just, one battle at a time. 3 months after the courthouse siege, Reggie stood before the city council chambers, his polished shoes and pressed uniform a stark contrast to the tattered fatigues he'd worn that fateful day. The charges against him had been dismissed weeks ago, but today marked his official return to service, not as a soldier, but as the new head of courthouse security training. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium, addressing the packed chamber. Today, we honor not just a decorated veteran, but a man who never stopped serving his community, even when that community failed to recognize him. In the front row, Patricia and Sarah beamed with pride. They'd spent the last months rebuilding their family, sharing meals, stories, and making up for lost time. But more importantly, they'd worked together to bring down Torino's network. Reggie's intimate knowledge of street operations combined with Sarah's legal expertise had provided the missing pieces needed to dismantle the criminal empire. Thanks to Sergeant First Class Hawthorne's cooperation with law enforcement, the mayor continued, 37 members of the Torino crime syndicate have been arrested, and Maxwell Defense Solutions faces federal prosecution. Judge Whitmore, now retired, but sitting in the audience, nodded in satisfaction. His decision to step down from the bench had come with the realization that sometimes justice required action beyond the courtroom. His recommendation for Reggie's new position had been his final official act. In recognition of his continued service and dedication to protecting our citizens, Mayor Thompson announced, I present this commendation for outstanding civilian service to Reginald Hawthorne. Reggie stepped forward, his back straight, his chin high. The same quiet dignity that had sustained him through years on the streets now radiated from him in his restored position. As the mayor pinned the commendation to his chest, applause filled the chamber. Thank you, sir, Reggie said, then turned to address the audience. This honor belongs not just to me, but to every forgotten veteran who still serves their community without recognition. My new role training courthouse security will help ensure that justice remains protected and that no one who seeks shelter in our halls of justice ever faces danger there. After the ceremony, Judge Withmore approached Reggie with a warm smile. "The security teams are eager to learn from your expertise," he said, extending his hand. "Though I suspect you'll be teaching them more than just tactical skills." "Every person who walks through those courthouse doors deserves protection," Reggie replied, shaking the former judge's hand, "whether they're wearing a suit or sleeping rough." Patricia slipped her arm through Reggie's, and Sarah joined them, forming the family circle that had been broken for so long. They were different people now, stronger, wiser, and more appreciative of their bond, but their core values remained unchanged. "Ready to go home, Dad?" Sarah asked, her eyes bright with happiness. Reggie looked at his family, then at his new colleagues, and finally at the commendation pinned to his chest. He wasn't just a homeless veteran anymore, but he would never forget those years. They had taught him that true service knew no uniform and that heroes could be found in the most unexpected places. "Home," he said softly, savoring the word. "Yes, I'm ready." Thanks for spending a moment here with me. If this story touched you, let's keep this connection going. Hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.